talking about Saturn and our individuation cycles and needing to grow up and be mature as we learn to separate from our mother, as we learn to work through the awkward teenager stages, as we learn about duty and responsibility. You'll really love this case study. You'll really love this examination on Saturn cycles. As you see on the board here, I have Saturn and then some numbers and some words. It says 7 mother, 14 teen, 21 college, and 28 grown up. What does this mean? I'm talking about the pressure of Saturn and what it brings into our life at different times. I'm talking about these ways that we separate from our childhood and our upbringing and become an adult. We're used to looking at age 28 as the Saturn return, 28 to 30, as the important cycle where we finally become our own sort of grown-up person. But we often overlook the smaller Saturn cycles that I'm going to talk about in this video. Again, this is very important because as we learn about the astrology of our childhood and the things that show the nature of our childhood, like the South Node of Ketu, which shows our past karma and how we incarnate in this lifetime, the things we didn't choose like our parents and our upbringing, which is shown by Ketu, the South Node, and then also the Moon, which is our mind, our memories, that innocent mind that just wants to connect, that remembers all the way back into our childhood, remembers how all those things that happened still refer to the person we are today. But now we also talk about what is the process of separation and maturity. How do we mature beyond just our childhood and start to individuate and be responsible and become committed and dedicated to this lifetime as a unique individual. And Saturn cycles, Saturn transits are really important in understanding that. Now these ages, or these numbers, correspond to ages. And here's what I'm talking about. If you start with the birth chart, you start with wherever your natal Saturn was. I'll say, for example, mine was in Capricorn, okay? When I hit 7, Saturn had moved 4 signs. Oh, I should do this. Let me do this. 7, Saturn moves into the 4th house from the natal Saturn. At 14, Saturn moves into the 7th house from the natal Saturn. At 21, Saturn moves into the 10th house from the natal Saturn, and as a grown-up, Saturn moves into the 1st house. It's called the Saturn return. So this is what I'm talking about. Now again, at the age of 7, Saturn moves into the 4th house from the natal position. And it shows how at age 7, we start to feel this pressure of becoming a unique person, feeling like a unique individual. We start to feel the pain of separation from our mother at the age of 7. There's a real pressure to feel not so dependent on our mother. That first, what's called a square, that first waxing square from the natal position, happens at age 7. Saturn has moved 4 signs from your natal Saturn, and this shows that tension of the square aspect in Vedic astrology and in all astrology. So the waxing square of Saturn happens at age 7, and it's in the 4th house from your natal Saturn. Then you feel that awkward teenager person when Saturn moves in the 7th house from your natal Saturn happens around age 14. That second square, which is the opposition. This is the awkward teenage years, and again, this is the separation from the mother, which is the 4th house, and becoming emotionally independent. Again, and the pain of that at 7. When you're around 14, it's your relationships with others, and you start to learn, you become more sexually mature. It's related to things like puberty, or you start to really have a sort of, you start to form sort of grown-up reflections with other, with like members of the opposite sex or sexually, or you start to become really interested in romance and relationships and things like that, that awkward teenager stage. Well, what is the awkward teenager stage about? It's because you become, sexual, and you start looking at yourself in comparison to your gender preference, opposite sex or same sex if you're gay or whatever. And again, this is when Saturn moves into the 7th house from your ascendant, and of course the 7th house is the house of relationships. Again, this is a more subtle and a deeper way of individuating and moving beyond just your childhood, right? And again, Saturn is the planet of time and karma and pressure. Brings the pressure to say, okay, now you have to figure out your relationships with other people. Then we get around 21. I put college because I didn't actually go to college, but when you're in your early 20s and Saturn starts going through that midheaven or that 10th house, he starts to bring that pressure to say, okay, what am I going to do? I know I'm going to do this. And we go to college, or Saturn brings that pressure to like accomplish something. So we set off in our early 20s, 21 or so. Saturn moves into the 10th house from our ascendant. It's like, okay, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to maybe see the world. With me, it wasn't go to college. It was, get drunk and play music. Which to me was my, purpose or lack of purpose. But it was me actually striving to be somebody. And but with me, it was get drunk and be somebody. I actually wrote a song called Get Drunk and Be Somebody. Anyway, but that 10th house, Saturn going through the 10th house, again, that's the next angle. You see, these are all angles. It starts in the 1st house because you're born when it's in the 1st house. Then 7, it's in the 4th. It's the 1st angle, which is the 4th house, separating from the mother. 14, the awkward teenage years where you're starting to integrate with other people more, and it's in the 7th house, which is the next angle. 21, now it moves and it's saying, okay, what are you going to do? And you're ready to take on the world. And again, these intervening years, this is when you're actually testing those things. And then 28 to 30, we have the famous Saturn return, which is well known. And when Saturn then comes back, when you hit around 28 to 30, then it comes back to where you are and you go through a new cycle of growth because it's gone through these stages, which I'm going to talk about a little more depth in a second. But it comes around to the Saturn return, and now it's pressuring you and saying, okay, what have you learned in your 28 to 30 years? And it really kind of brings in this integration of, when I was in college, I thought I could take on the world, but now I'm 28 to 30 and I'm ready to really get serious about something. So often around that age is when we want to get married, or we want to do this, or we want to now get serious, quote, about our life and who we are. And again, so these are very important touchstones in the soul's separation from the childhood and moving beyond just our patterning, and we can really mark these ages. I have a great story. I'm so blessed to have a fantastic and amazing spiritual teacher, Amma, my guru Amma, and she's talked before about how we're supposed to raise kids. how we're supposed to treat kids. And she's basically said that from the time they're born until they're 7, she uses these ages roughly. She says from the time they're born until they're 7 years old, you just want to give them all the love in the world. Just all love, total devotion. Give them anything they want. Even basically like spoil them till they're 7. Right? Give them all the love in the world. Just be very devoted to them. And then from 7 to 14, as they're learning, as they're getting to know themselves, right? Because from 1 to 7, you want them to bond with the mother or with the nurturing. You want them to bond and feel safe and feel that the universe is their home and feel loved. So you just want to give them love. 7 to 14, because kids are going to go through this pain. Again, these Saturn cycles are real. It doesn't matter what your parents do or what your parents did. You felt this at this time. No matter what your parents were doing, this was you going through this. So from 7 to 14, she says we want to just be patient. Be patient with them as they're getting to know themselves, right? As they're getting to know themselves, because again, at 7, we start to develop our own mind, right? Like, this is me, and I'm not just defined by my connection to the family. This is me. I'm this person, and we start to develop a lot of interests. We start to have, think about that. I think back in those times, that's when I really started to develop like this love of baseball, right? That was my first real love. Started when I was like 7 or 8 years old. I love to play, I love to play sports, but I also like to play with cars and like to do this. But then around that time, I was like, this is the thing. And like, that was my sort of identity on some level, separate from what was going on within my family unit. But then she said so you just want to be patient from 7 to 14. Amma says when they're a teenager. Then once they become like a teenager, from 14 to like 21 time, that's when you want to be strict. You have to be strict at that time. She's like, okay, now you need to make them like follow the rules and be strict with them so that they don't. And again, you could see how they kind of need that discipline at that time. Now they're old enough that they need to learn discipline. They need to be, you just have to be strict. And strict doesn't mean mean or anything. It just means, don't let them run wild or anything like that. You want to be strict. You want to make the rules clear. You want to hold them to standards that that they should be upholding. Again, this is really what it means by the strict part. Is don't baby them at that point. They're old enough to know right from wrong and know better and follow rules. And so you want to be strict from 14 to 21. And then she says, and then after when they become young adults, then you want to let go of them. Not let go, like don't love them anymore, but basically don't control them anymore. Let them be their own person. Again, this is also a big problem parents have. They try to keep living their parents' life for them for the rest of their life. So Amma says at that point, stop. Your job is done basically as being there, as how you can be influencing them in that regard. Now you need to let them go and live their life. And of course always be there to love them and whatnot, but stop trying to tell them what to do or dominate them or whatnot. Of course, this is what parents keep doing. They hang on to them. So Amma says at that point, let them make their own decisions and they're free. Let them go in that sense, energetically. So again, it's very interesting how this tracks with the Saturn, with these Saturn squares, with this Saturn cycle, right? Again, just to recap, when you're born, this will be like down here. Like you're born and you're at 0, right? Like I say, mine is Capricorn. So from 0 to 7, Saturn was moving through Capricorn, and then when I hit 7, it went into Aries. That was my 4th house. And that showed the 7 like separating from the mother, like the pain of the separation from the mother is going to happen in life around 7. And that's when we're individuating, that pain of separation from the mother and wanting to feel independent. and develop a lot of interests. That's a lot of what happens between 7 and 14. Then 14, you get that awkward teenager reflection, right? As Saturn goes into the 7th house. Again, 7th house has to do with relationships, right? That 4th house, of course, has to do with the mother. And so we feel that awkward teenager phase at that time, right? And then again, now we take that forward. It's like, okay, then we kind of navigate that. We learn, we maybe date, we have friends, we learn about ourselves socially, and then we go off and now we want to make an impact in the world. Saturn hits that around 21. He hits that square, that waning square from our natal Saturn, 10th house, from your natal Saturn. This isn't from your ascendant, it's from your natal Saturn. And he brings that pressure of the young person who's like, going off to college or not going to college, maybe traveling, or like, I use myself as an example of like, okay, this is when I was working in my band and I'm dreaming of the future and the thing I'm going to work toward. And again, Saturn brings pressure in all of these areas. When you're 7 and he goes to the 4th house, it's the pressure to separate from the mother. So as your mom, keeps babying you when you're that age, that's when you start going, oh, mom, stop. That's when you really start to get about it, right? Around that age, 14, this is when you start to really notice and be that kind of overly sensitive person, because Saturn brings the pressure to now say, okay, you have your interests, but who are you in relation to this other people? You're in that awkward, embarrassing stage. Then you work through that, and then he brings the pressure, okay, what are you going to do? Up there in the 10th from your natal Saturn. And then eventually, from there, he moves back like it sets you on some course. Again, notice how it also brings the pressure to get you to do something, right? You're in college or whatever, it gets you to do something when he goes through that 10th house. And then you do it, and then you get around 28 to 30, and you're like, all right, boy, back when I was in college, I thought I had it all figured out. Now Saturn comes around to that return, and you're like, okay, now I understand. I can't take on the world, so I have to be more measured in what I apply my time and energy to. And we learn, and that first Saturn return is that age of maturity, the first time when we feel the pressure of the Saturn coming back to our original vibration with it. And these things continue. Then the second time it goes into the 7th house, right? When you, instead of being 20 to 30, you wind up being 35 to 37. You can keep these things going. We're always in some relationship of Saturn hitting these angles, right? But this is a very interesting thing to understand about outliving your patterning and your conditioning. And Saturn transits from the natal Saturn shows these benchmarks in time. At age 7, it went from your 4th house, from the 4th house of your natal Saturn. Age 14, it was in the 7th house from your natal Saturn. Age 21, it was the 10th house from your natal Saturn. And then 28 to 30, it returned. So again, these things are very much reinforced. There's a lot involved in this as well, even when you look at modern psychology and neuroscience, where they reaffirm these ages, especially this age of 7, of separating from the family unit and being, that pain of individuation. Of course, we all know about the awkward teenager stage because we lived it, and we know of that young person stage when we're maybe off at college, maybe the first year of college when you're 18 or 19 or whatever, it's like, oh, I'm just going to drink and have fun or whatever. But then it gets serious. When you hit around 20, 21, you start to get really serious. It's not a joke anymore. You're like, what am I going to do, right? And then you get that return. So I hope this was helpful. And again, I'm teaching a class on childhood astrology. And I'm going to be talking about some of these transits. There's also a really important cycle with Jupiter that happens, because again, Jupiter is every 12 years. At least he makes a circuit every 12 years. But you can do this, run this kind of it's called a synodic cycle. You can run these synodic cycles from every natal position. We already do it when we have a solar return, our birthday quote. That's when the sun comes back to its natal position. But particularly Saturn, because he's slow moving and he hits these places from the natal position, and these are, you can track these things to our development. Of course, our development in relation to Saturn themes, which is about growing up and bringing the pressure to grow up and to be mature about those things. Again, to be mature about our relationship with our mother, and we can't hang on to our mother forever, or to be mature about other people. The way we be mature is we get all nervous and weird about it. We got to learn how to do it, right? Work through all that to be mature and grow up about responsibility. Right? What are my responsibilities? To be mature about our own identity. Right? So anyway, I hope this was helpful. And again, I'd love to have you in the class on the childhood astrology that I'm teaching. There's information below this video or somewhere for you to investigate that further.